Please welcome to the stage our next presenter, Cait.
Hi everyone, I'm Cait. I am technically from New Zealand, but via the Gold Coast and then Canberra and now Melbourne, so it's been a hell of a time. My main New Zealand fact that I have to share is that Quasi, the big hand statue on top of City Gallery, is coming to Australia, which is very good. I use they, them pronouns, but I won't fight you if you use she, her at the moment. And I work as a consultant with Red Hat, which often means I'm starting in new teams and working with them to support and improve a lot of things, including culture and practices, which is where this talk has kind of been inspired out of. Now, I know sometimes I forget what talk I'm in the middle of the talk while I'm listening to it, so we're just going to get rid of that. We'll break down the talk by the words that are in the title. First off, we're talking about tips, so this will be hints, frameworks to consider, things that have worked for me before, to build and repair. So whether we're starting with a clean slate or noticing an embedded issue, we can build and repair those. The sentence structure is a little bit wrong. We're using empathy to repair those other teams. We're building and using understanding of yourself, other people, and the surrounding context and pressure. And then we're doing that in order to work with other people and improve the ways that our teams and situations and our interactions work between groups of people. Many functions in cybersecurity are really reliant on this. A lot of you don't necessarily do the things yourself. You don't do everything in the company yourself. Other people might be the people patching vulnerabilities. They might be building servers for you. They might hopefully contact you when something feels suspicious or they need some security advice. A lot of the concepts I want to cover about empathy are going to be a little bit difficult to communicate or necessarily fully understand in a short talk, so don't feel bad if you could only come away with a couple of things you thought deeply about. But also, some of these might be things that you've already embedded into your consciousness, but it's always good to be a little bit thoughtful about it. I'm going to mention mental health very lightly just a few times throughout the talk as well, but it shouldn't get too deep. First off, the structure of the talk that we're going to go into, we're going to talk about signs that maybe there's something causing inter-team relationship strain, and indicators that maybe you should come back and read these talk notes, or check the references, for example. Then we're going to go talk into the observing phase, like if you've done a mindfulness exercise, maybe the body scan, where's the tension being held? Is it in the back of your shoulders? What or who is looking stressed? And what pressures or contexts might be contributing, what noise is there in the background, for example. And then the active influencing steps. So these are actions to take, outcomes to aim for. So in the signs, so this is, remember, triggers for looking at the purplecon talk, or looking at your notebook, or checking out the archives on the purplecon website. A few examples of situations where you might remember that you should do this. Maybe you're new to a team. You're coming in with a fresh perspective. You're not as embedded in the current dynamics. As a consultant, I'm often coming into a new team and noticing those frictions and difficulties. It's a lot easier to notice and dig into that when you're in a fresh perspective and you're a new face. There are no bad feelings attached to you or already embedded within your opinions. Maybe you've got a new team relationship that you're building. Maybe you're onboarding a new customer. Or you're interacting with a new team, and this is about gathering that information, building the relationships to avoid those issues in the future. Maybe some other reminders. You've noticed that you're feeling stressed or frustrated. You've had a frustrating email or a stressful interaction. Maybe you've had a complaint in your team or something like that. Or maybe you just went to purplecon, saw a cool talk. And you thought, oh, I should sit down and think about the interactions and dynamics in my organization. So, now that you've remembered to come look at these slides, the notes, my recommendations, or act on your own, you're allowed to do things on your own. We'll go on to the tips on understanding the problem in the context. Usually before we start acting on it is a good place, I think, to start. We want to understand both teams' conflicting priorities and influences and contexts. So for example, like development team wants to get code out the door. Operation team wants the service to remain on. Cybersecurity, often, we want the things to not be hacked, unless it was by us, in which case we quite would like it to be hacked. But there'll also be KPIs, management priorities, workload pressure that will be different between different teams. A really strong example of this that I think would be really useful for a lot of people here is the book, The Phoenix Project. It physically hurts to read sometimes. But in there's a CISO called John who starts off screaming at the meetings, being like, we're vulnerable, we need to fix everything right now, I need to fix all of these vulnerabilities today or we're going to be in so much trouble. And towards the end of the book, he realizes that possibly there are other priorities going on. Goes and interviews the various executives in the environment, and gathers their KPIs and then can tailor his advice to what makes the company succeed. As well as this, we want to look at what the common problem points are. What are the emails that you usually feel stressed after reading or writing? Maybe the operations team is getting annoyed to be asked about old software that they're trying to upgrade, and now it's morally bad to be running that old software. So maybe that's something that's causing a little bit of angst. Or maybe it's misunderstandings. If there is a conflict that you're perceiving in these emails, could there just be a different style of communication rather than a wish to get into fisticuffs? The phrase that you often hear in this situation is assume positive intentions, which can be really difficult. And we don't really mention that when we talk about assuming that, especially like we heard earlier from Ash's talk. If you're already in a burnt out mind space, you're going to be negative by default. It takes a lot more work to get into a welcoming mindset, or if your relationships have already soured. Something also that can lead to this is neurodiversity and different methods of communication in the workplace. So one of the memes that you hear about, like people with ADHD or autism, we hate small talk. But sometimes you hear people say, so you might get emails saying like, oh, I hope you had a great weekend, I loved your work. And then in the like third paragraph after that, they'll get into like what they need from you. But sometimes when I'm thinking about it, I'm like, shouldn't I just save the time? They don't have to read all that, I just want this thing. But some different styles of communication can mean that someone might think that I've actually insulted them, that I don't care about them. So it's that kind of miscommunication that sometimes gets into that. Part of those misunderstandings is also defensiveness. So as a response to various things, sometimes people might say, sometimes people might respond in a defensive way. They might deny you, they might deflect, they might say, actually, your thing is incorrect, I haven't done anything wrong. That's understandable, but frustrating sometimes. I try very hard to not take it personally when it does happen like that, but once you understand that there might be things leading into it, then that's a lot more useful. Part of observing as well is that often you might notice that yourself is doing this. I've absolutely gone defensive once I've been called out for something that I forgot about, or I've just been too busy for it or something like that. So just noticing where you're at and that maybe your defensive manner has negatively affected something is a useful place to start noticing it. A lot of the tips that I'm bringing up are also a lot easier when you're in a good headspace, when you're not burnt out. As we heard earlier from Ash, like I mentioned, negativity and isolation is really hard to work around. If it's already in place, getting back into a healthier place is difficult. I don't have great tips for that. But a couple of places that I personally have benefited from, a psychologist, once you have the money for that, been great. Mindfulness is often a word that doesn't work for a lot of people, but if it does work for you, meditations are really nice. A non-judgmental phone app that I've really enjoyed using is called Smiling Minds. And that's from an Australian nonprofit. And it also mentions sentences like, if you've forgotten what you're doing, that's fine. That's what your brain does. Just keep counting. And a couple of things like that that just built up really nice habits in there. So you've gathered the information about what's happening in the situations. And of course, this is not all discrete. You are allowed to gather new information in other sections of this cycle as well. But when you want to change things, a couple of the ways to do that are working relationships with individuals. I find this really easy in some ways. Partially that is being a new person and also being femme-coded. It's quite easy to make friends in some ways. Some of this might be quite obvious to a lot of people, but showing genuine interest in what they're working on, asking questions, gathering that context that you were talking about earlier. Small talk is also really useful. If you get into a conversation about like coffee or like how to barbecue or like some art that you saw on the weekend, some video games, that's a really good way to build that unrelated trust that can then lead into like a good baseline for having good assumptions about each other in the future. And another part of that as well, when I'm talking about genuine interest, this is a great time to validate your assumptions about their context, maybe their KPIs, their workload pressures, things like that. For example, like if I'm understanding correctly, you're prioritizing this for a release in 3 weeks. Maybe I heard your team was under a lot of stress recently, or like, oh, I heard there's a restructure. What's happening with your team? What's coming out of that? The more difficult tool here is to challenge or correct behaviors. This one I hate. I'm much better at just leaving. Which is fine sometimes. But if you are in a place where you have the emotional energy, the spoons, the, not leverage, but like the position of power of influence and relationships that you've built up to get into this place, being able to change behavior that is going badly is really useful. And it can improve things a lot for a lot of different people. For example, one of the ways that you can give feedback to people is this situation, behavior, and impact structure. So the person here on the left is saying, when I called about the project status, I heard you'd call our team stupid. And that made me feel awful. The ideal response to that would be, oh, I didn't realize it had that effect. I'm sorry, won't happen again. More likely, you'll hear something like, oh, you shouldn't have walked past. You should let us know when you're going to be walking by, or like, oh, I didn't mean it that way. That kind of dismissive effect. And that can feel pretty bad to receive that kind of like denial of what you're saying. But no one ever takes feedback very well the first time you talk to them. You can hope that they're going to be going away and thinking about it a bit later. And there's a reasonable chance that might happen. An important part of that as well is that empathy won't always fix a situation. If behavior isn't changing after you've done your best with the resources, including your own, that you have, in my opinion, it's good to have different options available. Accepting, reducing, and stepping away are the things that I've written down here. So accepting would be like, I guess I can deal with that person being slightly rude in emails. That's not always going to be an option. Another option is reducing. Maybe you can find someone else on your team to interact with that person in your required interactions. And the third one is stepping away. So maybe that's quitting. Well, don't have to talk about that too much. But there's usually different things that you want to try first. Here we are. And the next real big option for influencing it is structural change. Maybe there's some negative interactions that can be removed by automating it, by cleaning it up, by realizing that maybe it wasn't ever necessary in the first place. If an interaction with pressure is causing issues, yeah, change it. For example, big into automating, big into like APIs and things like that, and it's a really good model. Maybe in this example, you're the person on the left and you've been asking this team to query their own systems for this indicator. Every time you reach out with that email goes into a queue in their work queue, and then it gets actioned, and then it gets back to you, and you have to like drop whatever you're doing or wait until your own queue finishes until it happens. So maybe if you set up an API so that you can just do it yourself, you're just doing it happily in the background. It's just working. The only delay is the computer delay, and you've got a well-designed system out of it. Some other options around here are, even if it duplicates systems sometimes, empowering another team might be a great option if the interactions are soured, for example. That's not a great reason to go into duplicating those systems. But in the team topologies framework, there's a tool, there's a little bit of mention of, yeah, duplicating efforts if the interaction deserves it. Back on the restructuring interactions and all of this stuff, something that I've struggled with myself a few times is healthy boundaries around it. If you're, whether naturally by socialization or by effort, a really friendly person, and you're the only friendly person on your team, that can put a lot of work onto you. If you're the only face of your team that anyone wants to talk to, the unequal distribution of that kind of glue work might impact the KPIs of that person. So if you're not the friendly face of your team, this is a great reminder to notice if someone else has picked that up, see if they can be recognized for their efforts, see if you can pick any of it up. And that applies to all sorts of other glue work, taking notes, all sorts of things. This is the picture, the one that I want you to definitely take a photo of. This is my boy Mickey. He's beautiful. He was meant to come in after I clicked, so you weren't meant to look at him too much. But obviously, here he is. The main takeaways from this, one from each section. One, start purposely thinking about difficult relationships I'll say all those words again. Start thinking purposefully about difficult relationships at work if you've got the spoons, the energy, the time for it. Consider different perspectives if you are having a bad time, or if someone you know is having a bad time. Maybe you've misunderstood something and you've escalated and it didn't need to be escalated. There might have been other ways that it could have been dealt with. And if all else fails, or indeed before anything fails, changing the interaction structures is also great. And finally, and very importantly, support each other, look after each other. Take care both of yourself and other people. I'll go back to Mickey. Pat your cats for me, please. He's very beautiful. He loves to sit in a box. I literally got that box out of my cupboard when some friends were over, and I was like, I bet you he'll sit in this box. Put it down, 30 seconds later. There he is. I also have references, recommendations. I mentioned most of these throughout the talk, I'm pretty sure, except for the ones on the right. I didn't mention those at all. But there's some previous talks from purplecon 2019 about empathy and humaning in groups, cybersecurity workers who are all very stressed. It's a hard place. But these links will be available. So, yeah, have a lovely time, everyone.